Welcome to the FarmBits podcast, a product of Nebraska Extension Digital Agriculture. I'm Jackson Stansel.
And I'm Samantha Teaton, and we come to you each week to discuss the trends, the realities, and the value of digital agriculture.
Through interviews and panels with experts, producers, and innovators from all sectors of digital technology, we hope that you step away from each episode with new practical knowledge of digital agriculture technology. Welcome, FarmBits followers and first-time listeners to the 46th episode of the FarmBits podcast. Before we get into this episode, there's an important announcement that I'd like to make regarding the future of the FarmBits podcast. Over the past year, we have enjoyed producing content about the state-of-the-art in digital agriculture for you to learn from. As we come up on our one-year anniversary, the FarmBits team has decided to make some changes to the podcast to make it more resilient and to bring better content to you, our listeners. During the month of September, we will be bringing on a group of new hosts to join me with expertise in a broad range of topics from animal science to agricultural education. There are two primary objectives of this restructuring. First, the diversity of host experience will allow us to bring you content focusing on a much broader range of topics. Second, having multiple hosts will allow our grad students to more intently focus on their research while still contributing their expertise to bring you quality content. To allow time for training new members of our hosting team and for the host to plan for upcoming content, the FarmBits podcast will be taking a short break until October 7th of 2021. On October 7th, FarmBits will return with an episode recapping the Tech Hub Live conference from July before getting back to the content that you've come to expect from FarmBits. We hope that you will share with us your thoughts on this restructuring as we go and continue to listen in to FarmBits episodes. Now getting back to this episode.
On this episode, we welcome Seth Gurley and Jesse Ziems from CSS Farms.
CSS Farms produces chipping potatoes in several different states and was founded in South Dakota.
This episode was recorded on-site at CSS Farms location in Columbus, Nebraska.
In this episode, we talk with Seth and Jesse about how they are using digital agriculture to stay on top of crop protection in a high-value crop like potatoes.
You will hear them talk about some technologies that we have already featured here on the podcast, as well as other technologies we haven't explored in this series.
The primary value of this episode is to get an inside look at a grower's perspective on the use of digital ag tools for precision crop management.
Here's our interview with Jesse and Seth.
Well, I'm Seth Gurley. I'm an agronomist on farm in Columbus. I've been here about 6 crops now.
Jesse Ziems, senior agronomist, been with the company for about 20 years. And so senior agronomist for Nebraska locations. So we got about 4 locations across Nebraska that I'll travel to.
What does CSS Farms look like overall? You know, what is it providing? Who do y'all supply potatoes for and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, so we're a multi-state company, fully integrated from initial seed production through the commercial side. We have farms out in Idaho, Washington, Oregon, Texas, New York, and then Nebraska. We also have a subsidiary or sister company called Tasteful Selections that does specialty crops of, baby potatoes, and they might do some other bell peppers or watermelons.
Got you.
That's a whole different segment than our potatoes here.
Yeah, so for anyone that isn't familiar with potato production, can you kind of give us an overview of potato production on this farm and from the seed to the end product?
So seed, comes in the winter months, but it's a full circle program here. There's never any good starting point. You can jump right in whenever, but seed, it all starts with the seed, clean seed. So we want to have our own greenhouse, which is doing the mini tubers or transplants. And it's being shipped to Cody Seed, and they're growing it out for multiple generations. But it's clean seed, disease-free. And that's what we take pride in, is having a very good product at the end of the supply chain.
Sure.
So we're growing commercial chip potatoes here in Columbus. So we bring in our seed during the winter months after we've shipped out last year's crop, storing that. And then we go into our ground prep where we'll start doing heavy tillage, break up compaction, followed by some fumigation. then do a dry fertilizer spread, which is all variable rated. You know, in the fall time, we did our grid sampling, 1.5 acre grid samples, trying to narrow down the zones for what we need and when we need it. After that, we go into planting, where we're planting 20-foot planters, 2 beds wide on our planters, 2 planters in Columbus. So it's a long season planting. And we go into pre-emerge herbicides, scouting.
The stuff you run into pretty much on every crop at that point,
Yeah, and water management's critical throughout the season. Making the right decisions of how much, when, then your fungicides, disease protectants, right into harvest again and shipping it out and seed. It's kind of a real quick overview of it.
I guess y'all are kind of operating on mostly rented ground here in Columbus, and you kind of rotate potatoes every 3 years in production. Is that right?
Yeah. So most of our ground we have in Columbus is leased because it is a 3-year rotation. We're doing the rotation, spreading it out over time for disease control. And we found that 3 or more years has been helping break some disease cycles. And so we're just constantly rotating around.
Sure.
And then on our seed farm, we're actually a 4-year rotation there, just a little bit longer rotation for disease management.
Gotcha.
And that crop typically is a little bit shorter too. So, some diseases like verticillium, we can kill that crop a little bit early before that kind of builds up in the plant.
Sure.
And that way it doesn't carry over as much of a load from year to year. So kind of disease management too.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's kind of what we want to get into here, is a little bit more about kind of crop protection. So what are your biggest challenges that you kind of encounter with a potato crop in terms of crop protection? I mean, across, weeds, insects, disease, everything.
Well, I think it all starts in the beginning, soil sampling in depth and having the right fertility program out there and water program. Because if you have a really, really healthy crop, you don't have to fight diseases or insects as much.
Sure.
It's naturally protecting itself. But once that kind of tapers off, then we get into how we start fighting fire, I guess.
Sure.
I think we have a lot of the same weed complexes of most corn and soybean producers. We got a lot of pigweeds. We got resistance to those pigweeds. We're also dealing with nightshades, morning glory, grasses.
Sure.
We don't have a lot of chemical control.
Sure.
With that being a potato, we got a couple of pre-emerge herbicides, and then we need the ground cover from the potato as it emerges to shade out anything else. As far as insects, we get some nagging. European corn borer early season, it'll tunnel in the stems or get potato leafhoppers, asters, insects of that. But we're trying to always manage, the right timing or the insect pressure to know if we need to spray for it or not treat for it, and then deciding if we need to treat for it, which stage is that insect at.
Sure.
Because different chemicals control different stages of life.
Sure.
And I guess we deal with a lot of diseases too.
Yeah.
We've been talking about that. We do the fumigation early before planting, about 14 to 21 days before we plant, let it gas off. And that's mainly for verticillium.
Okay.
That'll plug the vascular tissue of the potatoes. And as you get further on in the season, late August, your crop's dying. It's usually from vert.
Sure.
We get a lot of early, season diseases such as gray mold, which is just moisture sitting on the leaf tips. But haven't dealt with that a lot. The one we do fight is early blight.
Yeah.
And now that one's a tough one. And managing it and knowing where to look, when to look, is all critical, and what products to use, when we need to start spraying.
So I guess kind of getting into these fungicides, insecticides, what sort of application equipment are you using to get these things out there? Y'all using planes, high clearance applicators, pivots? I mean, how are y'all going about kind of getting these products out there to help your crop?
Combination of everything. We got our own on-farm sprayer with tracks on it, which is really nice. So it's at our disposal. It's a luxury item, I suppose you could say. So we're not waiting on the co-op to come out and spray for us. I'm out there scouting and I find some pigweeds that are already, half an inch big. I'm calling the sprayer and he's out there in 90 minutes spraying, treating if we need to treat for that. If Mother Nature throws us a curveball and we can't get the ground rig out there, we'll chemicate some products out there for pre-emerge herbicides. And then fertilizer, most of that's done through the pivot in season.
Sure.
We have used an airplane or helicopter in the past, but having a ground rig, I think, has been fundamental.
Yeah, just better coverage overall,
Sure.
Where we're, depending on what we're using for the particular chemical, we might be using 12 gallons or 20 gallons an acre for the carrier. So we're getting pretty good coverage with that.
Sure. So we had a chance to kind of, tour around the farm this morning and see a lot of this technology that y'all have sitting here. And I guess to kind of get into some of the tools that y'all are using to kind of influence your crop protection decisions and just kind of track your crop and the crop health over the course of the season. This crop canopy aspect, are y'all using any particular tools out there to kind of track that crop canopy in addition to scouting or anything like that? Or?
Yeah, we're using a program, Canopio or Canopio. I'm not sure how you say that one,
Sure.
but we're using that app to kind of, instead of visually looking at the canopy and trying to estimate what it is, we're actually using an app that hooks to your phone and you can take an image and it'll kind of determine what that percent canopy is for you. And we're using that to really look at not only individual varieties, but in a particular field, how long is it taking us to get from emergence to 100% ground cover? And, we kind of say we're into the business capturing sunlight. And so we want to get from emergence to 100% ground cover as quick as we can. And that definitely helps us in weed control.
Yeah, I think my favorite part of the tour was definitely the sprinkler pivot irrigation system. Are you guys using, or can you describe like the system that you had on this sprinkler pivot and what you are using it for crop protection or?
So the pivot bot, as we call it, it's a high-speed pivot. It's making about an 82-minute circle, putting on 200ths, like 0.02 inches of water.
Yeah.
Which is hardly anything for water. And we've been using it for 2 years now to apply some of our fungicides. It's allowing good coverage. We think it's getting underneath the leaf tissue too, underneath the leaf in the plant. So if you have insecticide or insects, you need to apply insecticides. It gets under there and might kill the nymphs that are underneath the leaf surface. I don't know if it's been better or worse than our ground rig, but it's definitely been easier to use than a ground rig.
Sure.
And 82 minutes or a 90-minute circle is fast.
Yeah.
And you don't have to drive a sprayer there and fill it up, spray it out, fill up again, spray a whole circle.
Sure. Plus you don't have somebody sitting in the cab all day, which is helpful, I'm sure, as well.
Yeah. So then you're cutting labor costs, machine hours there.
From a disease standpoint, we haven't had any issues of, any major blow-ups for disease. So I think it's worked very well for us.
So with irrigation and pivots being such kind of a crucial part of your management for potatoes, I'm sure you're trying to get as much out of them as you can, out there on the farm. And when we were walking around, you kind of mentioned the Prospera system that I guess it's cameras that are mounted on individual spans out there on the pivot. Would you mind telling us a little bit more about that and kind of what potential you see there and what that system's trying to achieve?
Yeah, so it's a camera-mounted system on certain spans of the pivot from valley. And basically, every time it's on, running in a circle, it's taking pictures as it's going. Then it's sent to the cloud, sent to an agronomist that they have hired to look through all the photos. And then they send us out a report once a week saying you have weeds here that are emerging. It's a broadleaf weed. They haven't got dialed down to exactly which weed yet,
Sure.
but I'm sure they'll get there.
Yeah.
It's kind of in its infancy right now,
Sure.
but it's detecting grasses, really nice. And then, as we were merging, it showed yellowing plants, and it gives you a GPS location where all those photos are taken.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and as we progress through the season, it's showing us insect feeding. There's holes in the canopy. This section of the field is wilting. It's been beneficial for us. It gives us another tool in the toolbox. I'm out in the fields every day during the growing season, but this kind of helps me out, guides me a little bit more. If I hadn't planned on walking that particular section of the field, I might walk over there and discover that I have a disease issue or I need to spray for insects. Or, it's been beneficial.
Yeah.
I think it's going to continue to evolve over time.
I think eventually, it's machine learning, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And so they're going to build into those programs to know, instead of somebody actually looking at that image, it'll know, okay, this is a brown spot. It's probably disease. And, maybe they'll get to the level of detail of what disease it is, but at least, through machine learning, you'll be able to kind of detect that without having somebody actually look at that image.
Yeah. It sounds like they offer a lot of, very targeted information for exactly what y'all are trying to do. Are there any other ways that y'all are using imagery right now to kind of inform some of your crop protection? Are there any other products that y'all have tested out for crop protection purposes?
Yeah, we're doing Taranis as well on
Okay.
6 or 7 fields here, doing the drone flights, and they're sending back imagery too. And it's more pictures than we've gotten with Valley. The level of detail is pretty similar. I mean, I've been happy with them, and we've been in discussion with them of how we can improve things. Both companies are giving you satellite imagery as part of a value-added package. And,
Sure. Yeah.
NDVI or infrared. You can look at that, but almost every technology company, that's standard now.
You got satellite through it pretty much. Yeah.
I think it's going to help us in the realm of, since we don't have a good yield monitor, and the reason for that is, it's kind of going off of weight, and when you get into heavy dirt, it's weighing some of the dirt, and nobody's really perfected a good yield monitor to separate dirt from potatoes. And so from doing R&D and not having a yield monitor to know, was that treatment effective or not? I think that's where some of that imagery is kind of coming into play, whether it's a fertilizer strip or, a certain fungicide that you put on. Now you can use some of this imagery to know, okay, we didn't visually walk out there and see a difference.
Sure.
But something in the imagery is telling us there is a difference there. And so that might mean now we go out and we do a testing where we dig up a certain area and kind of check the quality and the yield of it.
You kind of showed us an app earlier where that y'all have kind of developed internally, that you're trying to integrate a lot of this information and dig into what exactly, like what stressors might be causing the issues that you're running into, whether it's Canopy, whether it's, late application of a chemical. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and kind of how you're using these numbers to influence your management?
Well, we've got multiple systems that are kind of all going into one BI system, right?
Yep.
So then we can look at reports, we can look at that data and make more of a real-time decision of some of the inputs that we put into a crop. One of those examples that we were kind of talking about is ground cover, getting that information in so you can look across your farm at multiple fields and see which field of a certain variety is a little bit behind on getting ground cover.
Mm-hmm.
Now we can discuss why is that. So we can look at all of our fertility information, how much nitrogen's on there, how much phosphorus. Is it a fertility issue? Maybe it's a disease issue.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what chemistries did we do on this field to, control some of the diseases? Maybe it's a cultural practice that we did that we got to make some sort of a change. And then, of course, you've got the really good fields, and why are those so good? And we can look at more of a real time in the season, investigate those things instead of kind of our winter farming of after the fact of, okay, what happened? We can investigate that right then and there and hopefully make some decisions in season to kind of change the end outcome.
So you mentioned like yield being a driver. One of the things that struck me was how well connected your potato production is to the end product, and like the potato chip factories that you're communicating with on the quality and a lot of other factors. So can you talk about how you can manage potatoes both for crop quality and for crop yield? And then another driver would be sustainability. You mentioned earlier, that's maybe a newer one that's starting to drive things. Could you tell us a bit about how those three drivers affect your production practices?
Well, I think they're all pretty complex. I think that's probably one of the reasons that maybe draws us a little bit to potatoes is just there's complexity there, and you're always going to learn. That all starts with variety selection, having a good clean seed crop. We can drive for yields, but we still have to have a good quality product. Consumers want a good product that they're going to eat. So a lot of stuff that we do is chips. And so when you open up a bag of chips, you want nice, clean, white chips. You don't want something that's green or it's got a brown spot and looks burnt. So the consumers kind of demand that you have good quality. And so your processors are going to push you as a grower to have good quality. And then really a big thing now is sustainable ag. And so those kind of all got to work together of sustainability and, there's a big goal in sustainability to reduce the amount of water that you're using. And so that's why we've got soil moisture sensors out there and trying to do a little bit of variable rate irrigation to put the water where it needs to be when it needs to be there.
So,
and really right now, I think with processors, that's a scorecard that you get.
Mm-hmm.
And so yield, although is important to us as a grower, to them, more importantly now is sustainability, and quality is just,
expected pretty much.
It's expected now.
Yeah.
I think we always used to, pride ourselves on we have really good quality product. And, that's what you're getting when you come from CSS, but
sure,
that's kind of the name of the game. Everybody has that. Now it's, really getting judged on what are you doing sustainability wise. And it's produced some challenges, and it's been good for us as a company, I think, to grow and try different things and
better ourselves.
Better ourselves in the end.
So, with potatoes, Zach kind of brought up this point that, you are so connected to the end consumer. And there are a lot of potatoes that are going, directly out to Frito-Lay that are going to end up with the consumer. And so, you're storing a lot here on the farm. How do you manage your disease when you get potatoes stored in the bin, making sure that, they're not rotting there and you're, having losses or kind of creating something that may end up, being a negative for Frito-Lay when it gets to the factory?
We kind of know through the growing season of maybe what issues that we have in the field that might be an issue going into storage. And so can we grade that out? I think one of the things I always think about when we talk about potato storages is if you have a bad crop in the field and you know that, a potato storage is not a hospital, right? You're not going to throw them into storage and they're going to get better over time.
Yep.
That's just not going to happen. And so when you get them into storage, the season really isn't over. You're still managing that crop. It's going through respiration and sugar breakdown. And so you really got to manage that. So we monitor sugars once a week during the storage season. Everything is temperature controlled within 1/10 of a degree. We got CO2 sensors in our storages, humidity controlled. And so we're always putting humidity in there. We're probably 98% humidity most of the time.
Oh.
And our air systems are almost going 24 hours a day.
Yeah. It's a delicate system. It's a delicate storage. If we decide we need to lower the temperature just to be able to store them later season, as far as May or June, we'll lower that temperature to 46 degrees.
Wow.
And going from, say, 48 to 46 degrees, we might lower it a tenth of a degree every 12 hours or every 24 hours. So it's a slow ramp so we don't put those potatoes into shock.
Interesting. Huh.
We'll go throughout the storage season, walk across the pile and maybe dig down a little bit, see what we got. We'll take them into our lab, we'll fry them up, see what the fry quality looks like, see if it's going off color or not. Probably one of the biggest things is we'll stand at the end of the air system. So all the return air, we'll stand there and we'll actually smell that air.
Huh.
And so if it smells kind of a pneumonia smell, we're in trouble. We're going to have breakdown. It's going to start to rot.
Sure.
And then there's some just kind of a rot type of smell, but it's not all that bad. We know that's probably a different disease that we're dealing with. And so, just your sense of smell, it's kind of odd to say that, but that does help determine maybe what disease you might have.
It sounds like it's a pretty labor-intensive process to kind of manage these bins and make sure you're staying on top of disease. And this is just kind of an off-the-wall question, but are y'all aware of any systems out there that are being developed to kind of visually see what's going on in a bin at any given point in time and maybe identify disease? Or is that something that, I don't know, we talked about light being an issue earlier today, so maybe it's not even really an option to have, vision systems within the bin. But
I think we tried a thermal camera inside the storage bins at one time. So if you're not getting enough good airflow,
sure,
you'll see that hot spot. It's a BTU system, so it's always reporting your return temp, inflow temp, your deviations from that, your CO2, your humidity. It's all graphed out and it's real time. If a bin goes down, we get a text message. Or if, the deviation is more than 2 degrees, what it should be, we get a message. So we know we better have somebody there soon looking at it.
Sure.
As far as in storage monitoring, I don't know of anything.
We just got a bottom pile sensor, temperature sensor, and the top pile temperature sensor. And we can look at those to see if we have some sort of a
spike or
temperature inversion, and we've got an issue. We'll usually take a wind meter down the tubes and check the velocity. And so if one of them is less, we can maybe determine that we got a hot spot. And so that pile is maybe shrink a little bit, kind of choking off the air somewhat. And so we know we will have an issue there. Now we can turn vents on and off through those air systems to maybe push a little more air through there.
I guess one of the things that I wanted to ask about is how do you, we kind of got into this a little bit earlier, but how do you really go about testing out different crop protection products and making sure that they're, efficacious? I mean, we briefly mentioned that Imagery is starting to be an option, but the lack of a yield monitor is kind of a really big deal. So can you tell us a little bit about how you do research trials out here on the farm to figure out product efficacy?
But I think it's the challenge, right? Because we don't have a yield monitor. So anytime we do a trial, I think we have a lot of trainings that we do in the winter and early on when we have newer people kind of come in and we talk about R&D research and split a pivot in half, right? We kind of display this in a presentation of, okay, we did treatment A on one side, treatment B, and the yield difference was, 50 bags difference.
Sure.
And okay, are you going to buy product A or are you going to buy product B, right? And everybody kind of makes a choice, but in the end, we didn't do any treatment difference. It's just a fact of variability within the field. And so it's hard to split pivots and look at different products. But we can do that from time to time. We'll do strips down a field. And then we also do a lot of small block replications for R&D. And it's all hand labor. So we got to go out there and do paired samples or, we get all of our small block replicated stuff by hand usually.
So when y'all are looking at technologies to use? Like, for example, the technology you've talked about integrating into this single BI system. What about a particular technology is most attractive to you? What do you look for in those technologies? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
There's a lot of technologies out there, right?
Yeah.
I think we probably look at it at first of, is there any research trials that have been done on it? I remember, some presentations from Jeff Miller at Miller Research, and he kind of always displayed, when we did R&D type training, is he would display, okay, in God we trust, everybody else bring data. and I think that's our approach to everything is, when we get sales reps or chemical reps, right? They come in and all this is great. We really want to know. We want that data. We want to know the statistics of that to really determine, is this new technology for us? And, has it been done before? And, can we talk to those growers that have actually used that technology? Sure. And then we'll start to kind of do our own research and adopt things.
Sure.
I think we like to think we do a lot of technological stuff, but we're probably slow to adopt just because of our limitations.
Sure.
Of it's all hand labor. We don't have a yield monitor, so it's pretty hard to adopt, especially if that new technology only gives you a little bit of an advantage.
Sure.
That's pretty hard to see in statistics.
Yeah.
But it might give you another 10, 20 bags.
Sure. So the efficacy is always number one, first thing, and then after that is more the user interface and how easy is it to work with and
right.
all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think definitely if it's not easy, it's pretty hard to get adopted.
Sure.
Because potatoes are pretty complex, and it'd probably be adopted a lot if it was just the agronomist doing it. But the amount of work that you have into a potato crop, you got a lot of people helping out. You have irrigation managers, you got farm managers, you got a lot of boots on the ground that are doing a lot of different things, and that technology has to be fairly simple and fairly easy to use.
Sure.
Yeah, we tried a lot of things that just didn't work. They were too complex. One or two people would figure it out, try to push it on the rest of us or the rest of the company. It just wasn't a good fit.
Sure.
So it's just keep everything simple. Go to the basics.
Yep. Simple enough to use, but complex enough to work. And you got to strike that balance.
Yeah.
What advancements, like what technology advancements do you think you're most excited for that you know about? And then also attached to that, are there any particular technologies that you wish were out there that you just haven't seen anything on that could kind of help you out a little bit around the farm?
Well, I think it's, from the diploid breeding, I think is going to probably revolutionize the potato industry. And that's similar to, maize and corn and how they do it. And so it's kind of since most of our common potato varieties are tetraploid, when you cross two varieties together, you don't always end up with the genes that you wanted. And so because potatoes have such a genetic load, you got a lot of good genes and a lot of bad genes. And so when they actually do cross pollination and everything, you kind of get what you get. And so I think that's why in the industry, 20 years ago when I started, we still have some of those same varieties. Mm-hmm. And you would think through, you look at corn or soybeans, what you had 20 years ago does not exist.
It's obsolete.
It's completely obsolete. But the potato industry, we're still using some of those varieties just because it's so hard to get crosses and get what you actually want.
Sure.
And so through genetics and breeding programs and doing diploid breeding, I think that's really going to change so we can get the traits that we actually want.
Yeah.
And I think that technology is 10, 12, 15 years down the road. But it's definitely something that I think is probably going to revolutionize the industry from that's yield, that's quality,
Disease resistance.
Yeah.
I mean, you do that, and then you can cut out a lot of protectants you have to use or are using. You cut back a couple applications. That's a lot of dollars for us.
Sure.
I think it's, when you talk about weed resistance and diseases that are out there, it's pretty important for us to understand what did the previous person do on this field. So we're not using the same chemistries. When we talk about crop protection, really, I think the number one thing that we talk about is resistance management. And we had an excellent early blight product. And, through some of our practices and how we use that product, we kind of lost that product.
Wow.
And we actually had sprayed it on a field. It's one of our premium products. We sprayed that product on the field. Week later, we go out there and it actually, after we sent it in and got it checked with the university, it actually fed on it. And
Wow.
so we went from excellent control to complete disaster. And so whether that's, in Texas, psyllids, the potato psyllid is a huge thing for us. And they quickly become resistant to any chemistry. And so really understanding integrated pest management, resistance management is really key for us so we're using the right rates. We're not using the chemistry too much.
And right timing.
Right timing, yeah.
Instar or nymph or adult or, eggs. You got to know which product's going to control that. And the life cycle is so quick on that psyllid. You got to be 3 steps ahead of the game for when you're going to treat for it.
Yeah. It's kind of one of those spots where having a camera out there, it's seeing it every time a pivot runs around, like that Prospera system could come in really handy, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think that's, I think as agronomists, we think we see everything, right?
Yeah.
We walk across a field and we know everything about that field, but, we're making one path across that 130 acres. We didn't see it all.
Sure.
And so I think that's where you could rely on a system like that to maybe, find that needle in the haystack before your whole haystack burns up, right? I mean,
sure.
That's kind of our end goal of, we do have a management plan, a fungicide plan that we kind of have. And that changes depending on what Mother Nature throws at you and what diseases you see in the field.
Mm-hmm.
And if that system can pick it up earlier, we might switch some of the things that we do for management.
Yeah. Instead of using a premium fungicide, we might just use a regular protectant that's, a lot easier to use and not as expensive.
Sure.
If you cut off one of those premiums, it's a lot of money.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can still, if you're timely enough, you can still get good enough control.
Yeah. But, early blight, you miss a spot that's 10 square feet. Next week, it's going to be 50.
Yeah.
And it just compounds if you don't find it and if you're using the wrong product or don't break out the big guns, I suppose.
Sure.
To stop it in its tracks.
Yeah.
It spreads like wildfire. Like you've seen on our field we're digging for fresh, we have to stop spraying for pre-harvest intervals so it's safe. You've seen how fast that canopy was just gone.
Yep.
Done for. And then we went to the other field where we've been treating it and it's just lush green grass almost.
That's right.
It's
Yep.
beautiful.
Yep.
So like you talked earlier, if we can detect those things early, maybe we can even use our high-speed pivot to swing it over there and put a certain fungicide just in that one spot.
Yeah.
That might help us reduce cost or, maybe we double up chemistry.
Right.
2 different modes of action now instead of just putting one across.
And so your resistance is way better managed.
Yeah, we'll have just way better for resistance management.
And your sustainability scorecard probably looks better too because you only put out so many gallons or whatever. Yeah. That's interesting. Do you have any advice for other farm operations, other potato growers out there that are trying to figure out how to get an edge on their crop protection techniques out there in the field.
As far as advice, do your due diligence, research, see what somebody else has done before you. Don't reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
Chances are the research has been done in a different state or a different university, and they've either proved you right or proved you wrong. There's no sense in working twice as hard.
Yep.
Life's easy if you capitalize on something else.
That's right.
I think it's just always trying to keep learning, figure out who is doing a better job than you, who are the better growers.
Sure.
Pick their brain, understand, who are they working with, what agronomists are they using, what are the things that make their operation so much better than what you're doing. I think we always try to go to a conference, we call them potato schools that, major growing regions for potatoes. And, I always think of, you got to at least try to walk away with one thing. Sure. Try to find at minimum that one thing that's going to really change what you do.
Thank you very much to Seth Gurley and Jesse Ziems for taking the time to join us on the FarmBits podcast and for being willing to host the FarmBits team up at CSS Farms in Columbus, Nebraska. I thought it was a really good time to get out on the farm, actually see what potato production looks like, get a chance to ride on a potato harvester. We really got to see a lot of cool things. And I think the two things that really stood out to me were all the different technologies that they're trying out to make pivots more of a multi-use machine in their operation and taking advantage of them because they are such a big part of their potato management. From the pivot bot to the Prospera system, there's just a lot that they're seeking to do. The other thing that I thought was really interesting is how much they care about canopy cover and how important that is to their total operation, from deciding when to harvest, whether they're harvesting something for fresh potatoes or for storage potatoes, but then also, kind of figuring out different management strategies, including for crop protection purposes. It seems like they're using quite a few digital tools to try to help assess that crop canopy. So,
yeah, both Jesse and Seth had a really good understanding of all aspects of their production system, everything from producing the seed potatoes to crop production, everything in season, like you mentioned, irrigation, also integrated pest management. They knew everything about the common diseases, insects, and weed pests that they face in a growing season, and then their end use product, like the potato chip plants, what they needed to see in that product that they were producing as well. So the whole production system they were very knowledgeable with.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it was a really great episode and hopefully a good opportunity for our listeners to learn about kind of a new production system for them. So anyway, really appreciate that, Jesse and Seth, and look forward to y'all joining us after our break on October 7th. We look forward to having you tune in again then. So thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to join us today on the FarmBits podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts to be informed about the latest content each week.
We welcome your feedback, so if you have comments or questions for us, please reach out to us over email, on Twitter, or in the reviews section of your favorite podcast platform. Our contact information can be found in the show notes.
We'd like to thank Nebraska Extension for their support of this podcast and their commitment to providing high-quality informational material to members of the agricultural community in Nebraska and beyond.
The opinions expressed by the hosts and guests on this podcast are solely their own and do not reflect the views of Nebraska Extension or the University of Nebraska-Lincoln.
We look forward to you joining us next week for another episode of FarmBits.